Alright, so today we're going to make some wine from some store-bought juice. So you use juice that's only got vitamin C or ascorbic acid, same thing as the preservative. It should work. Just don't use any juices that use potassium sorbate or some kind of benzoate. But let's get started. So I'm cheap, so I just got some bread making yeast from the store for a couple bucks. Just going to add in a packet. It's all going to settle out once we put it in the fridge at the very end after everything's done brewing, so I don't really mind putting too much in. And I find that the fast-acting bread-making yeast kind of brews everything faster, so you can have the batch done fermenting in like 6 days. So I kind of use the ratio 4 gallons of juice, 4 pounds of sugar, and then maybe I'll fill it up to about yay high with some water. Just because if it gets a little too concentrated, the yeast kind of has a hard time staying active. I don't have a funnel. So I am going to be using peach mango, or peach pear juice, what is it? White grape peach, yeah, juice. I usually like the peach mango cocktail sauce, or juice, but they didn't have any at this particular store. So all this sugar we're adding in should be converted to alcohol at the end. So it doesn't really matter what kind of sugar we use. I just use white so it doesn't alter the flavor of the wine like brown sugar might. Okay, so we got our yeast in and our sugar in. Now we just got to add our juice. So I've got 8 bottles of juice. And then the final portion of this, I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the final portion of this is we need to kind of seal the top without sealing the top. We're going to keep the bottles, by the way, because I don't know about you, but I don't really have a container to hold 5 gallons of wine in the end. But for the airlock, so that no air gets in but the CO2 can get out, we're actually just going to use a balloon and poke a little pinhole in it. And as the gases expand, they're going to expand the pinhole and it'll release more CO2 and it'll equilibrize. And then it should pop. And then as the fermentation kind of winds down, we're going to be producing less CO2, so the balloon's going to shrink and that hole's going to shrink. And then we won't get any oxygen back into our wine, so it won't sour. I'm going to rinse all these out when I'm done. In between batches, I like to clean this big 5-gallon jug with some Providone iodine. You could use bleach, but usually when I use bleach to clean something, I keep that bleach taste in it, and I don't like that. So I try to use iodine and then just fill up the rest with water and slush it around. And I've never had a problem with that. Just like a couple teaspoons of iodine. And when we bubble this wine in the end, it's still going to be active, even though the rate of fermentation and CO2 production is going to be almost nothing. When we bottle it, it's actually going to carbonate the wine. So it'll be like a bubbly wine if you want it like that. If you don't want it like that, just leave the lid on this bottle as cracked while it's in the fridge so it can vent that extra CO2. And then once it'll be cloudy when it's done fermenting because it's been churning so much with all that yeast. Once we put it in the bottle and put it in the fridge, it's all going to settle out to the bottom and it's going to clarify and pretty much be just as clear as this juice is right now. Because people don't. Then we're going to transfer it to another bottle or rinse out one of these bottles and start transfer, rinse, just because nobody wants to be gifted cloudy wine or wine with stuff in the bottom of the bottle. That's poor form. So we've got 2 more bottles. Probably should have actually poured all these bottles in before the video started, but that's just poor planning on my part. Can't really start over now. I'm not going to add any water just because if you get it too much fuller, when it starts fermenting it's going to froth a little bit. And if there's not enough space in here, it'll actually overflow. So I'll just leave that. And if I need to add water later, I will. So usually just stretch a balloon. Yep. Let me actually go get a pen real quick. I didn't set one aside. Regular needle. Just poke it in one side. And if you find that your yeast that you used is fermenting a little too quickly, the balloon's staying a little too big, looks like it's going to pop, you can always poke another 2 or 3 holes in the balloon so it can vent that gas a little bit faster. So I'm actually just going to slosh this around a little bit, try to get some of that sugar stirred up. And it'll dissolve over time. But yeah, that's basically it. I'll make another video and tack it on to the back of this portion of this video about a week from now probably. And then I guess I'll go into the bottling and clarifying in the fridge. So it's now 2 days later. You can see the balloon is slightly inflated. I can smell the CO2 and the fruity aroma. You can see it's churning away in there. You can actually see the bubbles going around. And the solution has gotten really cloudy as the yeast is kind of propagated and is stirring it up. If you actually shake it, kind of hear the balloon getting a little hiss from the extra CO2 coming out because it's basically carbonated right now. You gotta be careful though sometimes because sometimes it can really froth up and might overflow. So I'm just gonna leave it alone and hopefully check back on it in about 4 more days. Let's see where it's at. So we're here about 10 days later. It's a little late just because I was busy with work, and I got food poisoning last week, so I was dealing with that. But here we are. You can see the solution's kind of started clarifying already. You can see some sediment settled out in the bottom. That's all the yeast. Most importantly, there's not really any bubble production, and you can see that the balloon is deflated now. So we've got all of our bottles we saved from when we started, and I've got a vinyl tube from Lowe's just to siphon everything in. I'm going to start off by siphoning some into a cup, and then I'll taste it, and if it's too sweet, then I'll add some distilled water, which I have a little of, and that'll decrease the concentration of alcohol in the wine and hopefully reactivate some of the yeast. So it'll just continue fermenting the sugar that's still there and make the wine a little more dry. So I'll come back after I've done that. Yeah, so I just tasted some of the wine, and I have to say, this particular yeast that I used this time from the supermarket did an exceptional job, because this is really dry. I didn't expect it to be so dry, actually, but that's not a bad thing. One thing I forgot to mention is that the vinyl tubing you get, you really shouldn't go under like a 1/4 inch or 3/4 inch diameter, just because this is carbonated. If I shook it right now, it would froth up, and when you start siphoning it through the tube, some of it will fizz like when you drink soda through a straw. And if the air bubbles get too big and break up the flow of wine, then it'll stop the siphon process. So you want to make sure that you have a large enough diameter hose. But I'm just going to go ahead and start siphoning into the bottle. You see I've already got some in the tube that I poured into my cup earlier. So I'm just going to set this on the ground. This will flow into the bottle, create a suction, pull more wine, and then the process will continue. And I'll come back after I've filled all these 8 bottles. Okay, so we've got everything bottled. You can see this last bottle is very cloudy because I had to I had to turn the container so I could get the hose down and deep enough to siphon. You will notice that even though I only put in 8 jugs of juice, we do have quite a bit of liquid left over, and a lot of liquid left over in this tube. You might be asking, where did all that extra liquid come from? And that is actually from that 4 pounds of sugar that we added. Because part of the breakdown process of the sugar in this vessel is as well as in your own body, is water as a byproduct. Water, ethanol, and the CO2 that comes out the top of the bottle. So you actually end up with more liquid at the end than what you initially started with. You can keep that and get a little extra, but I don't actually have any more containers, so I'm just going to dump it down the sink. And then additionally, you can keep the yeast at the bottom of this container and use it in your next batch. And you might have noticed, if you follow along with this video or try it yourself, that even though the majority, I'd say 90% or so of the yeast seems to stop producing bubbles while you're brewing during the last 3 or 4 days, you will notice that there are still some spots that consistently keep producing bubbles, and that will be yeast that has mutated from your yeast packet and can withstand the higher levels of alcohol in the solution, whereas the majority of the yeast cannot. So if you want to reuse yeast from the end of a batch for the next batch, that selected for yeast will have an opportunity to multiply when you start your new batch, because there's a whole new round of oxygen in the juice when you first pour it all in. So it'll have a chance to multiply, and then you'll have your own strand of yeast that can withstand higher levels of alcohol. So that's why people try to reuse the tails, I guess you'd call it, of their batch between batches, just because they're
the yeast that they're working with. If you like the way the wine tastes or how it turned out, you just keep reusing it, and it should mutate over time and evolve, and hopefully adapt to the higher amounts of alcohol that you're trying to produce. And then don't expect it to be on par with like champagne yeast. You're probably not going to get 20% alcohol wine out of this, but it is something you can think about. Or you can just start with a new batch of packet of yeast every time, if you're lazy like me and don't want to keep this in storage. Because remember, it is a live organism, so you should probably sprinkle some sugar in on it every once in a while if you do keep it bottled up between batches. So we're going to put all these bottles of juice in my fridge. You'll notice it's quite empty, so lots of space. And then over the next week or two, most of this cloudiness, if not all, will just settle out to the bottom. And then you can go ahead and just drink one of these bottles, and then you can take a smaller hose. You don't need something this big. And you can just start siphoning one clear bottle, leave the sediment at the bottom into a clean bottle, and then rinse that bottle out, and then go down the chain. Transfer one to the other, to the other, to the other, until you have just clean bottles with no sediment in the bottom. Because I don't know about your friends, but mine probably wouldn't be up to drinking wine with crud at the bottom of the bottle that I claim to have made myself at home. So it's just good form. So this has been Making Wine with me. I will go ahead and upload this video now. I won't bother waiting for it to clarify in the fridge, or transferring the juice from the wine from one bottle to the other. So yeah, hope this was helpful.